Hey guys, Mind Behind the Story here. Just wanted to dedicate this episode to my lifelong friend JT/Zekken, the inspiration for the character JT in the story. Glad you're out of the hospital and back home, brother. Hope you enjoy this episode. I put a special Easter egg or two in it for you specifically. Hope you enjoy. Drugs are for thugs. Previously on Thomas and JT's adventure. The rails carried Thomas, Mac, and Clarence north through Montana's frozen dark. They thought it would just be the three of them, until the tracks brought two unlikely companions. First came Gabrielle, a French-Canadian survivor with a wooden leg and a shotgun across her lap, found by the glow of a lone campfire burning beside the rails. She barely spoke, her broken English clipped and sparse, but the weight in her eyes told the others she was no stranger to survival. Then came JT. They found him held up in a train switch station, the doors barred, the windows blackened with smoke and frost. A Desert Storm veteran, battle-hardened and wheelchair-bound, yet armed and unbroken. When the barricade finally opened, it wasn't weakness that rolled out, it was defiance. Now, with 5 souls and a cat called Bootstring aboard, the train barrels north. The rails scream with steel and fire, and the unknown waits just ahead. The train clattered through the night, smoke curling back over the cars and vanishing into the black sky. Snow hissed against the steel, thin at first, thicker the farther north you rode. The engine complained with every mile, but Mac kept it alive with steady, stubborn hands. Inside the freight car, the crew settled into their uneasy places. Clarence leaned on a crate with his coat pulled tight, talking to Bootstring like the cat had been elected with him. The tuxedo stray purred without interest, its tail twitching against the wood. JT checked the LMG mount on his chair again, the clink of metal on metal filling the silence. His face caught the lantern light as he looked at you.
Day and a half,
he muttered.
if the rails hold.
Gabrielle sat against the wall in her furs, shotgun across her lap. She said little, only a soft word now and then when someone addressed her.
Cold.
She whispered once, her accent heavy.
Train. No stop.
Her dark eyes drifted to the floorboards, the cat shifting against her leg. Mac called back from the cab, voice rough.
She'll hold. Old iron like this takes a lot to kill it.
But the forest outside pressed close. Dark pine on both sides, the occasional glint of ice on a frozen creek, the faint suggestion of movement where no wind blew. Every sound felt sharper up here, every shadow closer. The train rocked and rattled, lantern light shaking across everyone's faces. JT sat quiet for a long stretch, hands resting on the steel arms of his chair. Finally, he broke the silence.
I appreciate you folks being willing to help me,
he said, his voice steady but low.
despite my chair, despite my situation. Most people would have rather left me in the cold to die than take the trouble. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always broken.
Mac pushed himself up from where he'd been leaning, boots thudding on the planks. He stepped to JT, heavy with years but not weak. Without a word, he tugged his shirt up, showing the sunken lines and hollow spaces where Agent Orange had taken its toll. His body looked half-robbed, a map of what the war had eaten.
The only thing makes a man broken
Mac said, voice hoarse but sure.
is giving up on his family, and you ain't done that. You're still here. That means something.
Thomas shifted, holding his left hand up so the lantern caught the scars and missing fingers. I lost my mind for a while, brother, he admitted. Cost me 3 fingers. Cost my best friend his life. But we just gotta keep moving. Try to make things right the best we can. Gabrielle had been listening, not fully grasping every word, her eyes moving between them. Slowly, she pointed at her wooden leg. Her English came in fractured pieces, accented, but her meaning clear.
Me, different too.
She said softly.
But still walk, still fight.
Clarence, who had been silent too long, let out a dry laugh.
May not be missing limbs,
He said,
but I was a disgraced politician. Most people wanted me shot more than elected, but I'm still here. We're all still here. And Bootstring,
He nodded at the cat curling up against him.
Bootstring doesn't care who we were before. He just knows we're warm and breathing.
The cat purred like a motor in the stillness, the sound settling into everyone's bones. For a moment, the train car wasn't just steel and wood. It was something stronger, A place where survival bound together pieces of broken lives, refusing to let them fall apart. The train clattered past a low stretch of farmland, where the moonlight caught on a frozen cow pond spread wide and glassy. A line of broken fence leaned behind it, the wood pale and skeletal against the snow. For a brief moment, the bleak woods gave way to something almost beautiful. Everyone inside the stripped-down conductor's cabin turned their heads to look. Matt cleared his throat, breaking the silence.
You know,
He rasped, thumb hooking toward the spider-webbed windshield.
we could bust a small hole in that glass with a wrench or something, shove through, collect some rocks from outside, build us a fire pit in the back corner here. Warmth, light, would do us some good.
The idea hung there, tempting. Thomas nodded slowly, gaze still lingering on the pond. All right, we'll stop here for the night, rest in shifts. Me and JT'll take first watch. Mac, Gabrielle, Clarence, you get some sleep. You'll need it. Clarence muttered something about not having slept properly in years, already leaning against the wall. Gabrielle only gave a soft nod, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. Bootstring curled up between her boots like he'd claimed them. Mac grumbled but stretched out near the lantern, shotgun resting by his side. Once the others drifted into silence, Thomas turned to JT. The man's wheelchair squeaked faintly as he shifted the weight of the mounted gun. "Let's go check out that pond," Thomas said, voice low. JT smirked, the corners of his eyes tired but alive.
Cold air will keep us awake.
Together, the two men eased the cabin door open, the hiss of cold air sweeping inside. Their boots crunched in the thin layer of snow as they made their way toward the frozen pond. The moon reflected off its surface like a silver sheet, cracked in places but solid. Behind it, the broken fence leaned like the bones of some long-dead animal. The night was quiet, except for the wind. Bootstring slipped out ahead of them, paws light against the snow. The cat's eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, body low, tail twitching. He paused near the broken fence, then lunged, disappearing into a drift with a muffled squeak. When he emerged, whiskers frosted, a limp chipmunk hung from his jaws. Dinner, quick and silent. JT wheeled close to the tree line, his big hands steady as he gathered sticks. He snapped them into short lengths against the frame of his chair, dropping the pieces into a canvas bag tied at his side. The rhythm was almost comforting, snap, drop, snap, drop. Thomas crouched along the pond's edge, gloved fingers choosing out stones from where the ice had spat them free. Each one clinked into his coat pocket. The fire pit Mac had imagined was taking shape in his head already. Then snap, a sharp crack in the brush. Thomas glanced up, assuming JT had broken another stick. "Got enough yet?" he whispered. But JT had frozen stiff. His bag of twigs had spilled into the snow, forgotten. His chair creaked as he shifted his weight, one hand drawing the worn .44 Magnum from the holster strapped to his frame. He raised it high, aiming toward the tree line.
Thomas,
JT hissed, low and urgent.
that wasn't me.
The woods stood silent, dark, every tree seeming closer than before. Bootstring dropped his catch, ears flat, staring into the same direction as JT's revolver. The fur along his back rippled up like wire. The pond's glassy surface seemed to hold its breath. At first, it looked like any other husk. Gray skin stretched tight, jaw working slow and hungry. But then Thomas saw it, the steel glint jutting clean through its gut. A sword, no, longer, curved. The blade had pierced right through the creature's stomach, the hilt still clutched in its decaying hands as though it had died trying to sheath it. The thing shuffled forward, the weapon swaying with its body, the black and red wrap on the hilt catching what little light the moon offered. Every step made the metal grind against its ribs. Bootstring hissed, low and guttural, tail bottle brush thick. JT's revolver tracked the figure.
What the hell is that?
His voice trembled, not with fear, but with something colder. Recognition that this wasn't just another shambling corpse. The zombie's head jerked unnaturally, as if the weight of the blade inside it was pulling it off balance. Its teeth snapped at the air. Snow crunched under its boots. Real boots, leather, cracked but laced tight, remnants of another life that didn't belong here. Thomas felt the stones in his pocket grow heavy. The fire pit was forgotten. His fingers itched toward his pistol. The night around the pond seemed to draw in close, like the world itself was holding its breath. The thing lunged, teeth bared, but Thomas was quicker. He swept his boot low and kicked the zombie's foot out from under it, sending the creature sprawling hard onto its side with a sickening crunch. Before it could rise, JT wheeled in, grunting as he wrapped both hands around the hilt. He wrenched the long ancient blade free from the corpse's belly, and in one brutal motion drove it straight down through the skull. Bones split. The body twitched once, then stilled. Breath fogging in the cold, JT held the weapon upright. Even under the moonlight, the edge showed a dull bite. Rust creeping along the steel, nicks scarring its length. The black and red wrap on the hilt was half unraveled, stained with old blood.
Christ,
JT whispered, turning it in his hands.
this thing's priceless, even like this. Doesn't matter if the world's gone to hell, this sword's older than most countries.
His voice was half awe, half reverence. But the moment didn't last. A low groan carried across the pond, then another. Shadows moved at the tree line. Thomas stiffened horde, 5, maybe more. Through the mist came 5 zombies, shambling in a broken line, their moans rising and falling like a chant. Both men exchanged a look, unspoken understanding passing between them. The sword wasn't worth dying over tonight. Back to the cabin, Thomas muttered. Lay low. Keep Mac and the others safe. They turned fast, but the ice betrayed them. JT's wheelchair, stripped of its tire chains, used earlier to secure him inside the cabin, spun as soon as he hit a slick patch.
Shit!
The chair twisted out from under him. With a violent clatter, he flipped backward, the ancient sword flying from his grip and skidding across the ice. The groans grew louder. The horde had split instinctively. 2 broke toward JT's fallen form. The other 3 stumbled for Thomas. Bootstring hissed from the shadows, chipmunk forgotten, tail lashing like a whip. The cold air filled with the sound of teeth and hunger closing in. The first of the 3 came at Thomas fast, arms outstretched. With no pistol at his side, he had only instinct. He swung low, boot snapping into the zombie's knee, the leg collapsing inward. The thing toppled, groaning. The second rushed him before he had time to breathe. Thomas's hand shot into his coat pocket, pulling free one of the stones he'd gathered. With a savage grunt, he brought it down hard into the creature's temple. The skull gave under the repeated blows, a wet crack echoing across the pond. The body slumped. The third clawed for him, rotten breath hot against the cold. Thomas twisted, caught it by the shoulders, and with a roar hurled it sideways into the frozen cow pond. The ice shattered beneath the weight, water swallowing the thrashing corpse. Its groans muffled quickly under the black surface. Meanwhile, JT lay sprawled on the ice, forehead cut and bleeding from the fall. His wheelchair lay overturned a few feet behind him. Refusing to surrender, he clawed forward, fingers slipping on the frost, leaving streaks of blood as he crawled. His eyes locked on the glint of the ancient blade. He reached it. With a raw scream, JT snatched the sword and swung upward as one of the dead closed in. The edge bit deep, shearing a leg clean off. The zombie collapsed onto its side, hissing and clawing. Another came down on him from behind. JT raised the blade again, but too slow this time. The weapon slipped from his bloody grip and skidded across the ice. The thing crashed onto him, pinning him down. JT's arms locked against its throat, rotten drool dripping onto his face. The 2 writhed and twisted, JT's muscles straining, the guttural sounds of the dead pressing in. His wounded forehead smeared red against the snow as he wrestled for survival. Thomas turned, another rock in hand, breath ragged, eyes darting between the struggling man and the blade lying just out of reach. The night hung on a knife's edge. Thomas didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the ice, boots slipping, and with all the weight he could muster, he brought the stone down onto the zombie's skull. The crack rang out sharp in the frozen night, the thing's head jerking sideways from the blow. That gave JT his opening. With a guttural shout, he heaved the corpse off him, rolling it onto its back. He straddled it, fists hammering down. Again and again his knuckles met bone, wet crunches mixing with his ragged breaths. Snow sprayed crimson under each strike.
Stay down!
JT growled through clenched teeth, every punch splintering what was left of the skull until it caved under the barrage. Finally, the body twitched once and went still. JT collapsed onto his side, gasping, his hands slick with gore. His forehead bled freely, But the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. Thomas stood over him, chest heaving, clutching the blood-smeared stone. The ancient sword lay just a few feet away, its blade dull in the moonlight, as though waiting for one of them to claim it again. Behind them, Bootstring crouched low on the snowbank, fur bristled, eyes darting between the men and the still lurking shapes at the tree line. The night was far from over. Thomas shoved the gore-stained rock into his coat and bent down, straining against JT's weight. He got his arms JT and hauled him upright, steadying him until he could lower JT back into the overturned wheelchair. With a grunt, Thomas flipped the chair and slid him back into place, then pressed the ancient blade into his hands. JT gripped it tight, chest still heaving, forehead a mask of drying blood. He spat onto the ice, then managed a crooked grin.
Now, as I was saying earlier, he rasped, holding the blade up under the moonlight. This here, it's no ordinary sword. Double-edged, 10th century Japanese officer's katana.
The edge gleamed faintly, rust and nicks breaking the shine but not erasing its heritage. JT's voice softened, reverent in a way Thomas hadn't heard before.
She's real rough right now, but with some elbow grease, I can fix her up. Luckily, he smirked, tapping his arm. My elbows still work miracles.
Together, they gathered what they came for, the bag of sticks and rocks, Thomas slinging it over his shoulder while JT kept the sword resting across his lap. Bootstring padded ahead, tail swishing, the faint rumble of her purr carrying in the frosty silence like a warning and a comfort all at once. The two men shared a look, tired, bloodied, but alive, and turned back toward the hulking silhouette of the train cabin waiting in the snowy dark. The train rattled steady on the frozen rails, the lantern light flickering against the metal walls. Thomas and JT pushed their way back into the cabin, boots and wheels clotted with ice and bloodstains smudged dark against denim. JT wheeled to a quiet stretch of floor near his pack, his breath still rough but eyes sharp. With a grunt, he hauled the bundle onto his lap, pulling free a small roll of cloth. Out came a whetstone, oil-stained rags, and a dented file, the kind of kit a soldier kept close long after the wars ended. He laid the katana across his knees, blade catching the dim light. Rust spidered along the edge, nicks chewed deep into the steel, but there was a defiant gleam to it still. JT muttered something under his breath, half prayer, half curse, then set to work. Slow passes of stone against edge, steel hissing with each drag. Thomas had taken the sack of rocks to the far corner of the car, near the cracked spider-webbed glass. He crouched low, arranging stones in a tight circle the way his father once showed him, making sure nothing touched the timber. His fingers worked steady despite the cold, every scrape of rock on steel floor echoing under the engine's hum. He stopped now and again, listening to the whistle of the night through the cracked pane, and finally picked up a length of iron to chip a small vent in the corner of the glass. A few sharp blows sent frost-sheathed shards tumbling out. Cold air spilled in, but so did a path for the smoke. Bootstring leapt up onto a crate nearby, tail curling around his paws as he watched, eyes reflecting firelight that hadn't even been struck yet. Clarence leaned with his back to the wall, watching the two men work without saying a word. Gabrielle sat cross-legged, arms folded across her chest, shotgun across her lap, gaze flicking between the sharpening blade and the newly built pit. She spoke only once, in that broken cadence of hers.
Good. Warm soon.
The train pushed on through the night, carrying its band of scarred survivors north, steel wheels crying against icebound track. Inside, the sound of stone on steel and rock on iron gave rhythm to the silence, a forge song of men who refused to quit. The lantern burned low, throwing weak halos on the walls. Thomas nudged Mac with the toe of his boot, JT giving Clarence's shoulder a shove, while Gabrielle stirred on her own at the sound. One by one, the second shift rose. Mac blinked blearily, scratching the grizzle of his beard before his eyes adjusted to the dim glow. He caught sight of JT's bandaged forehead, the smear of dried red on the cloth, and grunted.
Christ, kid.
He muttered, sitting up with a groan.
We tall boxing while we was asleep. Or did you headbutt the train itself?
JT smirked tiredly, tightening his grip on the blade across his lap.
Didn't need your ugly mug to do it.
Mac's gaze dropped, and for a moment the old veteran just froze. His brows lifted, and his whole face cracked with disbelief.
Where the hell?
He rasped, pointing a crooked finger at the gleaming steel.
Did you get a damn sword?
Clarence blinked awake at the words, peering over JT's shoulder with his politician's curiosity. Gabrielle leaned forward slightly, her shotgun still resting easy across her lap, eyes narrowed on the ancient weapon. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened. The katana caught the lantern's shimmer, black and red wrapped hilt stark against JT's hands. The edges weren't finished yet, but cleaner than when they'd first pulled it free. JT chuckled low, almost proud.
You'd be surprised what crawls out of the woods.
Mac shook his head slowly, as if the world hadn't been strange enough already.
Kid, I've been through Agent Orange, napalm, and the kind of jungle nightmares you don't write home about. But I ain't never seen a corpse walking with a samurai pig sticker in its belly.
The train clattered on, wheels shrieking against the rails, while the crew sat in that flickering light, some laughing under their breath, some just staring at the impossible steel. The fire in the stone circle burned down to a dull glow, smoke whispering out through the cracked glass. The rhythmic groan of the train against the frozen rails gave the car a lullaby all its own. Thomas stretched out on the cold planks, staring up at the ceiling ribs, words half-formed on his lips. Something about or the way the snow looked when the moonlight hit it right. But the sentence trailed into a mumble. His eyelids dragged shut, and before he could finish the thought, his body gave in. Sleep took him heavy, boots still on, hand limp near the coals. JT leaned back in his chair, shoulders slumping. The katana slid carefully from his lap to rest against the side of the crate. His fingers stayed curled around the whetstone, stained dark with oil and rust, but his chin dipped. In a breath or two, he was gone too, chest rising slow and even, the bandage across his brow shadowed in the lantern's glow. Bootstring hopped down from the crate, curling into the crook of Thomas's arm, purring faintly against the rattle of the train. Mac shook his head with a faint grin, tugging his coat tighter.
Pair of worn-out pups,
he muttered, settling in by the fire pit. Clarence only shrugged, eyes still flicking toward the sword, the steel that didn't belong here. Gabrielle leaned back against the wall, face unreadable, her broken English silence filling the space where questions might have been. Outside, the night howled against the windows, and the rails carried them farther north, the weight of steel, secrets, and sleep rolling with them into the dark. The train clattered northward, wheels screaming against rails half buried in snow. Outside, pine forest pressed close, black trunks rising like spears, their crowns heavy with ice. Far off, the Rockies loomed in the moonlight, jagged silhouettes cutting against the frozen sky. Every whistle echoed through the wilderness before vanishing into the storm. Clarence sat upright against the wall, eyes locked on the sword, his thoughts hidden but restless. Gabrielle leaned back, arms folded, shotgun across her lap. She broke the silence only once, her words clipped and rough.
North soon. Border. Close.
The night outside wailed against the car, and the train pushed deeper into Montana's frozen dark, carrying its scarred crew ever closer to Canada. Thomas stirred with a stiff groan, the boards of the freight car having left their pattern pressed into his cheek. His body ached in that way that meant he'd slept longer than he'd meant to. The fire pit had burned out to little more than ash, the faint smell of smoke clinging to the air. The train rocked steady beneath him, its heartbeat unchanged, carrying them ever northward. When he blinked himself fully awake, the light filtering through the cracks wasn't morning gray but the faint gold of evening sun. They'd been rolling all day. The frozen pond, the fight, the blood, and the moonlit ice were far behind them now. Bootstring was still curled at his side, though the cat's ears twitched toward the sound of the whistle. JT slumped in his chair nearby, head tilted, chest rising and falling slow. The katana leaned against the crate at his shoulder, sharpened edge now glinting cleaner than before. The whetstone sat on his lap, streaked dark. Mac sat at the far end, a cigarette between his fingers, watching the snowy mountains drift past with that hollow stare old soldiers wore when their mind wandered somewhere far away. Clarence had nodded off upright, his chin on his chest, hands folded like he was waiting for a meeting to begin. Gabrielle sat the same way she always did, shotgun across her lap, furs pulled tight, eyes on the door. She glanced at Thomas when he stirred, her voice soft but heavy with her accent.
You sleep long time.
Outside, the light faded fast, evening sliding into night, the endless Montana wilderness stretching on, pine, snow, and shadow swallowing the horizon. Thomas had just lifted his head, lips parting to answer Gabrielle, when Clarence's voice split the car like a gunshot.
Get down! Ambush!
Before Thomas could think, Clarence lunged past him. The old mare's hands grabbed the throttle and shoved it forward hard. The engine screamed in protest, wheels shrieking against the icy track as the train surged. Clarence dropped low behind the control console just as a round smacked into the spider-webbed windshield, glass exploding outward in glittering shards. Thomas hit the deck, boots scraping against the boards. Bootstring darted under a crate with a hiss. Another shot rang out, then another, quick, controlled bursts. Sparks danced from the steel frame where bullets struck. Somewhere outside in the timber, muzzle flashes winked like fireflies in the darkening snow. Whoever was out there knew where to hit, and they weren't amateurs. Mac rolled off his crate with a grunt, dragging Thomas down harder.
God damn it. Of course they'd hit us in the cut.
He barked, eyes flashing. Gabrielle was already on her feet, shotgun gripped tight, crouched low near the wall. Her voice cut through the chaos in broken English.
Not stop, no stop train.
JT stirred awake, eyes wild, fingers fumbling for the katana and the .44 on his belt at the same time. The bandage on his brow had fresh spots blooming red where his head had cracked against the chair. The train thundered forward, but the glass still rattled loose from the shot, snow curling into the cabin with every rush of cold air. Thomas moved before he could think the better of it. He snatched the last bottle of the expensive Libby whiskey, jammed a rag into its neck, something to give it weight, and launched it out through the shattered windshield toward the bright pinpricks of muzzle flash in the trees. The bottle arced, glass catching a line of lantern light, and smashed into the snow where the gunfire was hottest. For a single beating second, everything froze. Then a flare erupted, a sudden orange bloom that licked up the trunks and threw the tree line into savage relief. One gunman went up like a torch, stumbling and shrieking, hands flailing as heat took him. Others yelped and dived for cover, their firing ragged and frantic now that their silhouettes were made plain. Mac cursed, but he was already moving, hauling the train harder as Clarence kept the throttle shoved forward. The engine answered with a wounded roar, metal screaming against ice as the little conductor's cabin surged ahead. Snow sprayed past the broken gap where the windshield had been. Warm breath and smoke poured back into the car. Gabrielle fired once from the doorway, pellets spitting into the night where a shadow peeked up, and JT lashed out with the katana when the nearest figure tried to climb the rail. The blade bit, gleamed, and came down with a sick, bright finality. Thomas rolled and scrambled, smashing a man's arm backward with the stone in his fist and kicking a second attacker into the snowbank as the train shot past. Bootstring darted out in the commotion, claws flashing at a boot, then skittered back under the nearest crate with a triumphant hiss. Clarence barked orders, half sensible, half frenzied, and the car filled with the smell of gunpowder, wet wool, and burning brush. The ambushers were disorganized now, some burned, some bleeding, most scattering into trees that no longer hid them. A handful pressed on, but the burst of fire had changed the shape of the fight. What had been precise fire from the dark became a panicked, blind scramble. When the dust settled, Thomas was breathing hard, knuckles raw where the stone had slammed bone. JT leaned back in his chair, the katana tucked against his leg, chest heaving but alive. Mac wiped ash from his face and spat. Clarence stared at the widening gap in the windshield, face pale and a little delighted in the way of men who survive against odds. Gabrielle's shotgun hung loose in her hands. She said nothing but gave a short, sharp nod. They hadn't wiped the threat clean off the map. Pockets of people still stalked in the trees. But the immediate ambush had been broken. For the moment, the train had its momentum, and momentum was survival. Thomas looked at the scorched snow where the bottle had landed, then at the katana in JT's lap, at Bootstring's fur catching the last of the ember glow, and let himself breathe once. The border was still out there, a blur of cold and light and possibility. They'd bought themselves hours. Now they had to spend them. 15 minutes after outrunning the ambush, the train thundered through a frozen pass, its wheels biting into ice-glazed rails. Everyone was quiet, too quiet, just the hiss of snow against steel and the muted creak of the cabin. Thomas sat cross-legged, digging through the ragged canvas bag at his side. His fingers brushed tin cans, an old coil of wire, a couple scraps of jerky. Then, buried deep, he found it. A slim glass cartridge with the faded stamp still legible. Yoga brand. J vanilla frosting. His lips twitched. Forgotten treasure. No vape, of course. The group didn't have that kind of luxury. But Thomas had something better. A portable solar bank and an old Android charger nobody used anymore. He still carried an iPhone, cracked and stubborn but alive, so the cable had been dead weight until now. He stripped the sheath clean, exposing the red and black wires, twisted them free with his teeth and plugged the cord into the bank. The hum of energy thrummed in his hand. Carefully, he pressed the wire tips against the cartridge in the spots he knew mattered. A spark. A hiss. Thin vapor began to curl. Thomas drew deep, lungs filling with that sweet, unmistakable bite of vanilla frosting. Bootstring's ears perked from the corner, the cat sniffing at the strange scent. Mac raised a brow but said nothing. JT chuckled, voice gravelly.
Hell, Thomas, you'll jury-rig anything.
The train rolled on into the Montana night, the air inside carrying smoke, steel, and the faintest ghost of vanilla. JT was first after Thomas, steadying the cartridge between two bruised fingers. He pulled deep, eyes closing, exhaling a soft stream that curled like incense around the bloody bandage on his head. His lips tugged into a rare grin.
Damn.
He muttered, voice warm for once.
Almost feels like Kuwait again, except colder and quieter.
Mac took it next, holding the wires like he'd handled dynamite in a trench. The old hobo warrior's cough barked out hard, but he chuckled through it, shaking his head.
Still hits harder than a fifth of moonshine.
Clarence hesitated, glancing at the smoke, the glow, then at the snow sliding past the window. With a shrug, he leaned in, drawing a cautious drag. His laugh came out soft and surprised, years of political polish falling away for the first time.
I'll be damned. Tastes like frosting on a campaign cake.
Even Bootstring had his turn, more out of curiosity than anything, batting at the wires as if he wanted a share of the ritual. The cat pressed close to Thomas's chest, purring louder as the warmth and haze filled the cramped car. Gabrielle only folded her arms tighter, eyes shadowed under her hood.
No,
She said in her broken English, clipped and firm.
not for me.
Her shotgun never left her lap. For a moment, the world outside ceased to matter. No gunfire, no blood, no frostbitten wilderness waiting beyond the rails. Just the hum of the battery bank, the faint sweetness of vanilla in the air, and the crew breathing together, scarred, crooked, and alive. The train carried on through the Montana dark, and for the first time since the lake, it felt like a moment of peace. The brakes shrieked as Clarence hauled the lever back, sparks spitting off the rails. The train lurched, shuddering to a halt just short of a crude barricade. In the lantern light, 4 soldiers stood in the snow, rifles shouldered and trained straight on the cab. Their uniforms were winter camo but frayed, patched over too many times. Frost clung to their beards, breath steaming as they barked rapid French into the night. Behind them, a pair of canvas shelters hugged the tracks, smoke whispering from a barrel fire. Thomas's stomach sank. He lifted his hands slowly, palms out toward the night. Mac, beside him, did the same, muttering.
Christ almighty.
The 4 rifles didn't waver. Their boots crunched forward in perfect rhythm, voices sharp and unrelenting in a language Thomas couldn't parse. He caught a single word, then lost it in the blizzard of syllables. His pulse hammered. Then came the uneven thunk of wood against floorboards. Gabrielle moved past them, her wooden legs striking each plank. Shotgun still cradled, she lifted her free hand and called out in French. The soldiers barked back, the tension in their stance shifting but not dropping. She turned her face toward Thomas, her words halting, thick with accent.
They defend only, not kill if we friendly?
JT sat rigid in his chair, fingers brushing the katana's hilt, but he didn't draw it. Clarence froze at the controls. Bootstring arched on Thomas's chest, fur bristling, a hiss cutting the silence. The 4 men advanced another step, rifles raised, their eyes hard in the firelight. The air was sharp enough to sting Thomas's lungs. He held still, hands trembling in the glow, waiting to see if Gabrielle's voice could disarm the standoff. "Tell him we just want to get to Canada, that's it." She glanced back at him, gave a short nod, then turned and spoke out in French. Her words rolled sharp in the icy air, cutting through the soldiers' barked commands. The four men stiffened, looked to one another, and their rifles dipped, only slightly. One with a gray beard spat into the snow before answering, his voice deep and certain. Gabrielle listened, her brow furrowed, and when she turned back to Thomas, her English stumbled like loose stones in a stream.
They say Canada.
She paused, searching for the word, eyes flicking.
Dead zone. No go. No food. No safe. People. All gone. Thomas felt his chest tighten. The dream of crossing the line, of safety waiting just north. It cracked right there in the snow. Gabrielle kept on, her hands gesturing small. They have boat, far, far. Other side country. They say, if we take them, by train.
She tapped the side of the rail car with her wooden leg, a dull thunk.
They give us place on boat.
The soldiers stood steady, rifles lowered but not dropped, their eyes following Gabrielle's every word. The campfire hissed as snow melted on its rim. Thomas's pulse thundered in his ears, a boat. Not here, not the border, but all the way across. Gabrielle finished in a whisper, her accent thick but clear enough.
They want ride. We give ride. They give us chance.
The night fell quiet, but for the crack of the barrel fire and the wind over the tracks. Thomas lowered his hands just enough to catch Gabrielle's eye. His voice was steady, but the cold air made it sound sharp. "Tell them. We'll do it. We'll take them to the boat. But this train ain't running on air. We need fuel if we're gonna make it that far." Gabrielle nodded, lips pressed thin, then turned back to the four soldiers. Her French carried into the night, quick and clipped. The men exchanged looks, one shaking his head, another muttering under his breath. At last, the gray-bearded soldier barked something short and final. Gabrielle translated, her broken English stumbling but clear enough.
They say they know. Place. Few mile. Old depot. Gas. Fuel drums there. They guard us. Help load. Then we go.
Mac shifted, lowering his own hands at last.
Figures.
He muttered.
Always strings.
JT leaned forward in his chair, eyes on the soldiers.
Better strings than bullets.
His fingers drummed on the katana's hilt. The rifles finally dipped, no longer aimed at hearts and skulls, but still gripped tight. The soldiers stood waiting, the fire behind them spitting sparks into the black sky. Gabrielle added one last whisper, quiet, only for Thomas.
They no trust easy, but if we help, they help.
The night felt less like a standoff now and more like a bargain struck in the snow. Thomas turned slowly, eyes shifting from Gabrielle to Clarence. The rifles were no longer pointed at their chests, but the weight of the soldiers' stares was just as heavy. "Clarence," Thomas said, voice low but firm. "You're the only one here who's ever been elected to anything. That makes you the highest-ranking man in this room. This ain't just my call." The ex-mayor of Los Angeles straightened against the wall. His breath smoked in the lantern light, his face drawn tight with the pressure. Bootstring slinked past his boots, tail brushing against his leg, as if even the cat was waiting for his word. Clarence let the silence hang a moment, then looked from the armed men to his own ragged crew. Mac still tense but ready, JT with blood on his bandage and a hand resting on the katana, Gabrielle holding her shotgun loose but steady, and Thomas staring him down with hard eyes. Finally, Clarence exhaled through his nose.
All right.
He said, voice steady but heavy with weight.
We play ball. We take these men to their depot, load their fuel, and drive this train where they need it. If it gets us safe passage on that boat, we'll do it. But
His voice sharpened.
we do it on our terms. We don't stop being a crew, and we don't take our eyes off them.
Gabrielle relayed the words in French, halting but clear. The soldiers nodded, the gray-bearded one grunting his approval. Rifles dropped to their sides at last, no longer a threat, but never far from reach. The deal was struck. The train, the soldiers, the depot, the path to the boat, whatever waited on that far shore, was laid out before them. The single cab was bursting at the seams now, Men shoulder to shoulder, boots muddying the floor, rifles propped against crates. Food sacks and battered gear filled what little space was left. The lantern light flickered off snow-soaked coats and the lean, hungry eyes of people who'd seen too much. Thomas shifted, brushing past a crate of frozen bread, when his eyes landed on one of the 4 soldiers. The man's uniform was worn thin, patched at the elbows, but on his chest gleamed 3 polished maple leaf pips, the mark of a captain. The others gave him just enough space to move without bumping shoulders, deference that said more than words. Thomas let out a low whistle and muttered under his breath, "Damn, this guy's seen a lot of action." The captain caught his eye briefly, a hard look that carried the weight of long marches, cold bivouacs, and firefights nobody in this train car wanted to imagine. Then he turned away, speaking a short command in French, and his men shifted without hesitation. The cramped car rattled on through the Montana dark, filled corner to corner with strangers, allies, and the thin hope of whatever lay ahead. The train rocked on the tracks, lantern lights swaying across the crowded car. The air was thick, sweat, gun oil, and smoke from the little fire pit seeping out the cracked pane. One of the soldiers shifted closer. His face was a ruin on one side, skin melted and twisted from some long-ago blast. The good half of his mouth tugged into a faint smile as his eyes landed on the bag at Thomas's feet, the tobacco haul. He muttered something quick in French, fingers gesturing to his lips, then to the pouch, then miming the roll of paper. The words were too fast for Thomas, but the intent was clear. Thomas snorted, shaking his head. "Ha! Oui, he said, laying on the accent like a joke. The half-burned soldier barked out a laugh of his own, rough and broken, like gravel dragged across a tin sheet. He held out a small scrap of rolling paper, waiting. Mac chuckled under his breath.
Hell, look at you, Thomas. Bilingual now.
JT smirked, still hunched in his chair with the katana laid across his knees.
Careful, you'll start thinking you're cultured.
Even Gabrielle cracked the faintest smile, though she didn't speak, just adjusted her furs and looked away. Bootstring sniffed at the pouch curiously as Thomas dug out a pinch, the cat's whiskers twitching when the soldier's scarred hands worked paper and tobacco together. The ritual felt almost normal, a strange kind of truce in the corner of a train cab, filled with too many people and not enough hope. The soldier lit up, exhaling smoke toward the vent, and gave Thomas a nod of gratitude, one word slipping out rough but clear.
Merci.
Snow swallowed the sound of the train as it slowed to a groaning crawl beside the depot. The little station sat squatting in the dark, its windows frosted white, roof sagging with ice. No guards, no watchlights. Just a padlocked chain-link fence and a scattering of old footprints half buried by drifting snow. Thomas and Mac exchanged a look as the brakes screeched.
Place looks dead.
Mac muttered, beard catching the glow of the lantern. The captain barked orders in French. Two of his men hopped down first, boots crunching in the snow, rifles ready. Thomas and JT followed, the wheels of JT's chair squealing as they bumped down onto the gravel. The air smelled faintly of diesel even before the locks were cut. The shed doors creaked open, and there it was, rows of fuel drums stacked like soldiers, the cold air biting at the steel. Dust lay thick, untouched for God knows how long. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just abandonment. Hell, Thomas muttered, running a gloved hand over one barrel. Lucky break for once. It didn't take long. Hoses dragged out, pumps cranked, the train's tanks filling with a sluggish glug-glug of fuel. Barrels were rolled and heaved up into the cab, every thud and grunt making the cramped space even tighter. By the time they were done, the car was wall-to-wall bodies and steel drums, the floor a minefield of boots, rifles, and cattails. Mac wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold.
If we weren't sardines before, we sure as hell are now.
Clarence leaned against a barrel, holding up a plain brown pack.
MREs too. Not many, but better than starving.
Bootstring immediately pounced onto one, batting at the plastic with her paw until Gabrielle scooped her up with a quiet,
"Non, chat."
For a moment, it almost felt like a victory. Fuel, food, warmth, all without a single shot fired. But the silence of the depot hung heavy, too perfect, like a stage set after the actors had fled. The depot smelled of dust and stale diesel, the kind of air that clung to skin. Most of the crew stayed outside with the train and the barrels, but the captain motioned sharply toward Gabrielle. She hesitated, shotgun still across her lap, until Thomas gave her a small nod. Inside, lantern light cut through the shadows. Rows of forgotten crates lined the walls, faded stencils marking Médicale d'Urgence and Armée Canadienne. The captain pried one open with the butt of his rifle, the wood groaning. From within, he pulled something wrapped in yellowed canvas. When he set it on the table and unfolded the cloth, Gabrielle's eyes flicked to it, and for the first time since Thomas had met her, her stony mask cracked. It was a prosthetic leg, crude iron and leather straps, hinges stiff with age. A field issue, meant for soldiers pulled from the line after amputation. It wasn't new, wasn't polished, but it was something more than the block of wood she'd been hobbling on for weeks. The captain's French rolled low and steady, a tone more human than command. Gabrielle listened, then gave a single tight nod. She set her old wooden stump aside with a dull clack, her fingers working fast on the straps. Thomas watched from the doorway, arms crossed. For the first time, Gabrielle looked not vulnerable exactly, but grateful. When the leather cinched and she shifted weight onto the new leg, the hinge squealed but held. She stood a little straighter, testing it with a cautious step.
Better.
Muttered in her clipped English, her voice thin but certain.
Better than block.
The captain gave her a short nod, not a smile, but close enough, then began closing the crate. Outside, the train rumbled with new life, the crew finishing the last of the loading. Snow hissed against the roof. The world was still cold and merciless, but in that little depot, Gabrielle had been given back just a sliver of dignity. The last barrel hit the steel floor with a hollow thud, and Mac grunted as he wiped his gloves on his coat. For a breath, there was only the crunch of boots and the hiss of snow against the depot walls. Then, nothing. The crows that had been lurking in the tree line gone. No wind through the pines. Not even the whistle of the storm that had been clawing the roof all day. Silence pressed in, thick as frost.
Too quiet.
JT muttered, his hands tightening on the katana's hilt. Bootstring's fur puffed out like a bottle brush, the cat backing toward Thomas's boot, a low, guttural hiss spilling from its throat. Gabrielle's face went pale in the lantern glow, her shotgun raised without a word. Then Thomas saw it. At first, just a blur against the snow, then a wall. A wave of black, rippling with endless limbs and snapping jaws, pouring over the white fields. The horde. Not a crowd, not a swarm. An ocean. Thousands, tens of thousands, all moving as one. The French Canadians muttered sharp, panicked curses, voices tripping over each other in French. The captain's jaw clenched, his hand trembling against the stock of his rifle. Clarence pressed up against the shattered window, staring wide-eyed at the coming tide. His voice cracked, half hysteria, half awe.
Well, they're the Snowstorm, and we're the lone train buffalo, and there's only one fucking way through.
The ground shook as the mast drew closer, their moans rolling like thunder. The rails ahead led straight into it. No sidetrack, no chance to outrun on foot. Only steel, snow, and the horde. Mac's knuckles went white on the throttle.
Then we don't stop.
He growled.
Not for a goddamn thing.
The fire pit spat sparks as the train engine roared awake, black smoke rising into the night sky. JT's voice rose above the howl of the engine, rough but steady. His hands gripped the katana across his lap as he bowed his head.
Lord, watch over us now. Keep our wheels on the rails and our souls in your hand.
The words hung heavy, swallowed almost at once by the thunder outside. Clarence didn't wait. His face was lit up by firelight and fear, his fist slamming down on the console.
Full speed ahead. Let's see what this old girl can really do.
Mac jammed the throttle forward. The engine screamed, the whole car shuddering as steel ground against steel. The freight train surged, black smoke belching skyward as the wheels bit into frozen rails. And then it hit. The first rank of the horde crumpled under the cowcatcher with a sound like brittle wood snapping, bodies splitting and flying aside in sprays of black ice. The snow turned red in the lantern glow. The train plowed deeper, faster, smashing through walls of undead that folded like paper under iron. The screech of bone and metal filled the cabin as the black wave swallowed them whole, pressing in from both sides. Bootstring yowled, claws digging into Thomas's coat as the car jolted and lurched, shoving piles of corpses off the tracks. Gabrielle braced herself against the wall, shotgun clutched tight, her broken English spilling out in gasps.
Faster, faster.
Every window was nothing but writhing black, claws and faces flashing in the dark. The train became a bullet through the heart of the storm, and still Clarence stood, teeth bared in a grin of madness.
She's got more in her. Push it, Mac.
The engine howled, fire belched, and the lone train buffalo drove straight into hell. The train thundered on, but the sound began to change. What had been a clean rhythm of steel on steel now came with a groan. The weight of the horde dragging on the wheels, grinding against the undercarriage. The snow was no longer white. It was black and red slush, bodies piling in heaps along the rails. The speed held, but the resistance was unmistakable. Each second forward felt like shoving through a mountain of flesh. The engine screamed louder, pistons rattling in their casings, firebox glowing white-hot. Mac gritted his teeth, sweat shining on his brow despite the cold.
She's bogging down. God damn it. She ain't stopping, but she feels it.
Clarence stood firm, knuckles white on the rail.
Don't you dare let off, Mac. This storm wants us buried, but we're the buffalo. Buffalo never stop.
Gabrielle pressed her palm against the window, eyes wide at the endless sea outside. Her voice came clipped, broken, barely above the roar.
Not human no more. Wall of death.
JT kept praying between grunts, each word louder than the last as if forcing the train forward with sheer faith. Bootstring wailed and dug deeper into Thomas's coat, claws piercing through to skin. The world beyond the glass was nothing but black waves breaking on iron. Thousands upon thousands collapsing into the grinder of steel, and still more surging behind. The speed dipped by a hair. Not enough to stop them, not enough to kill the momentum. But every man in that car felt the strain like a hand on their throats. And through it all, Clarence threw his head back and bellowed, voice raw against the storm.
Keep her charging. We aren't dying on this side of the border.
The train roared. The horn split the night, and still it drove through the ocean of the dead. The train shrieked like a wounded animal as it tore through the wall of flesh. Metal ground against metal, gears rattled in protest, the whole engine shaking so violently Thomas thought the bolts would tear free. Sparks spat from beneath the console. The cab lights flickered, plunging the men into shadow before sputtering back to a weak orange glow. Clarence clung to the throttle, veins bulging in his neck.
She can't take much more.
He roared over the chaos. The windshield, already cracked and streaked with blood, spiderwebbed further as bodies slammed against it. Outside, the horde stretched endlessly. A black ocean swallowing every horizon, the moans of hundreds of thousands drowned only by the roar of the straining engine. The wheels screamed, slipping against icy, gore-slick rails. The smell of burning oil and iron filled the cabin. For one breathless moment, the train lurched, slowed, the nightmare pressing in as if the horde itself had seized the machine by its throat. JT braced himself, scarred brow shining with sweat, katana across his lap.
If she stalls here,
He muttered, voice tight.
we're done.
Mac slammed a fist against the bulkhead.
Hold together, damn you.
Bootstring hissed and dug claws into Thomas's shoulder as the floor vibrated, a grinding metal groan echoing from beneath their feet. Then silence. For half a heartbeat, the cab went dark. The engine's roar cut to a dying gasp. In that abyss, only the moan of the dead remained, pounding fists against steel. And then, with a thunderous cough, the engine roared back to life, a surge of fire and fury kicking them forward again. The survivors clung to whatever they could, the train shuddering, threatening collapse at every rattle. The horde thickened ahead, shadows swelling across the snow. The question lingered like frost in their lungs. How many more miles until the beast gave out for good? Hey guys! Thanks for sticking to the end of the video. Here's a sneak peek for the next episode. Now recovering from the attack by Devin Cassidy, who now lays eternally next to 2 burning vehicles, are counting heads and weighing options. Do they look for a new home, or hope the cabin holds up against a few thousand walkers? Turns out, however, Psycho may have an ace up one of his sleeves. And, of course, Ed, who has Mr. Nibbles. Be sure to find out what happens on the next episode of Red and Todd Blackout FM. Also, special thanks to Ryan and JT, who I know will be seeing this point.